The direct address opening, you rose this morning and told yourself a lie. It was not a malicious lie. Indeed, you were scarcely aware you were telling it. You believe yourself reasonably capable, reasonably confident, reasonably equipped for the challenges before you. This comfortable fiction is so familiar that it has ceased to feel like fiction at all. It feels like truth, but it is not. I have observed this phenomenon across every rank and station of life. The politician who believes himself persuasive because he has never faced genuine opposition, the merchant who believes himself shrewd because fortune has not yet turned against him, the husband who believes himself patient because his patience has never been truly tested. Each constructs an elaborate portrait of competence, and each portrait is painted not from observation, but from hope. The first act of genuine strength is recognizing that you have been building upon sand. This is painful. I shall not pretend otherwise. But the pain of honest self-examination is brief and useful, whilst the pain of continued self-deception is prolonged and destructive, manifesting in failed enterprises, broken relationships, and the slow torture of living beneath your potential. What I offer you is not comfort. It is something far more valuable, the architectural plans for a mind that circumstances cannot defeat. The lie you tell yourself every morning. You rise each morning and tell yourself a lie. It is not a malicious lie. Indeed, you are scarcely aware you are telling it. You believe yourself reasonably capable, reasonably confident, reasonably equipped for the challenges before you. This comfortable fiction is so familiar that it has ceased to feel like fiction at all. It feels like truth, but it is not. I have observed this phenomenon across every rank and station. The young officer who believes himself brave because he has never been shot at, the politician who believes himself persuasive because he has never faced genuine opposition, the merchant who believes himself shrewd because the tides of fortune have not yet turned against him. Each constructs an elaborate portrait of competence, and each portrait is painted not from observation but from hope. Consider the case of a young officer I knew during the Sudan campaign. He came from excellent family, had received the finest education, and possessed every external marker of capability. He believed himself courageous. Why would he not? He had worn the uniform with distinction. He had spoken of duty with conviction. He had imagined himself steady under fire. But imagination is not experience. When the dervishes attacked at Omdurman, this officer discovered something terrible. His courage was theatrical. It was a costume worn for peacetime admirers. Under actual fire, with actual death screaming toward him, he froze. Men around him acted whilst he stood paralyzed. That moment of humiliation was the most valuable experience of his life. It shattered the lie. You see, most men know less about their own patterns of failure than their enemies do. Your adversaries study your weaknesses with care. They must if they wish to defeat you. Your friends are too kind to mention them, and you yourself are too invested in comfort to examine them honestly. The result is that you navigate life with a map that bears little relation to actual terrain. The first act of genuine strength is recognizing that you have been playing a character called yourself without ever meeting the actor beneath the costume. This is painful. I shall not pretend otherwise. But the pain of honest self-examination is brief and useful, whilst the pain of continued self-deception is prolonged and destructive. Here is a technique I have found valuable. Stand before an actual mirror and speak aloud the areas where you believe yourself competent. Watch your own face as you speak. Notice the micro-expressions of doubt that flicker across your features. Your body knows truths your mind conceals. Or try this. List every criticism you have received in the past year that stung. Not the criticisms that rolled off you. Those were likely inaccurate. The ones that wounded. The sting is evidence. If the criticism were false, it would not have found its mark. These collected wounds form the most accurate portrait of your weakness that you are likely to obtain. The gap between what you intend to do and what you actually do, this gap is the measure of your current weakness. What did you fail to do yesterday that you told yourself you would do? Do not explain it away. Do not provide context that softens the failure. Simply acknowledge you intended something and you did not do it. This is where you are. The reader who completes this chapter honestly will find they cannot return to comfortable ignorance. The fiction has been exposed. This is rather like admitting you are lost. Painful in the moment, but essential if you wish to find actual directions. Now that the comfortable illusion is shattered, a question presses. Why do we defend these fictions so fiercely? What makes honest self-examination so difficult that most men never accomplish it? We must understand the enemy within before we can defeat him. Why your mind fights against your progress. Your mind is not a neutral instrument awaiting your commands. I wish it were. Leadership would be considerably simpler. But the mind is a heavily fortified position held by forces that benefit from your weakness. Every pattern of failure you have developed serves some function. It provides some comfort, avoids some pain, protects some illusion. Until you understand why your mind resists improvement, you will lose every battle against yourself. I learned this during what I call my wilderness years, that long decade of the 1930s when I stood nearly alone warning of the Nazi threat. The comfortable path beckoned constantly: silence, accommodation, participation in the general delusion. I watched men I respected choose that path, men of intelligence, men of experience, men who should have known better. The resistance I felt within myself was not different in kind from theirs. I merely understood its nature and refused its counsel. You must learn to identify the three voices of resistance. The first is fear, which whispers, "This will fail. You will be humiliated. Better not to try." The second is comfort, which soothes, "This is unnecessary. You are adequate as you are. Why disturb what is peaceful?" The third is pride, which insists, "You are already sufficient." These teachings are for lesser men. Each voice has a characteristic tone. Each deploys specific arguments. Naming them strips their power. Here is the peculiar thing. Every weakness you maintain provides a hidden benefit. The man who procrastinates avoids the possibility of failure, for one cannot fail at what one never attempts. The man who remains silent avoids the possibility of rejection, for one cannot be dismissed if one never speaks. Find the benefit your weakness provides, and you find the true obstacle to your progress. Your resistance uses time as a weapon. It assumes, correctly in most cases, that you will eventually tire of effort. The enthusiasm that burns bright on Monday has dimmed by Thursday and extinguished by month's end. Combat this by expecting resistance to increase, not decrease, in the early stages. The forces within you that profit from your weakness will not surrender without struggle. Victory comes to those who outlast, not to those who expect quick triumph. When you decide to undertake a difficult task and find yourself suddenly interested in reorganizing papers, or checking correspondence, or remembering urgent but trivial obligations, recognize this as resistance wearing disguise. Do not argue with it. That is its game, and it plays better than you. Simply notice, resistance has arrived. Then proceed anyway. The noticing is everything. It separates you from the resistance, rather than identifying you with it. The deadliest error is attempting to eliminate resistance through argument. Your resistance is not stupid. It can generate counter-arguments forever. You will not reason your way past it. The solution is not better arguments, but action despite arguments. Treat resistance as weather, present, sometimes unpleasant, but not a reason to cancel the journey. You now perceive your own internal resistance as a phenomenon to observe rather than obey. This changes everything. Previous attempts at improvement failed not from lack of will, but from fighting blind. Now the battle becomes strategic, but understanding alone changes nothing. What specific techniques enable a man to accurately inventory his weaknesses despite the mind's resistance? That is the practical question to which we now turn. The inventory that changes everything. There is a precise method for cataloging weakness that transforms vague discomfort into actionable intelligence. Most men conduct their self-examination in generalities. I lack confidence. I procrastinate. I avoid conflict. These statements are useless. They are too vague to address and too comfortable to disturb. When I prepared for my first significant speech in the House of Commons, I knew I struggled with oratory. But struggling with oratory told me nothing. I had to ask, was it memory? Vocabulary? Physical presence? Nervousness? Stance? Each deficiency required different remedy. Through careful analysis, I identified 7 specific weaknesses, each with its own protocol for improvement. The generalized anxiety transformed into a precise curriculum. This is what you must do. The difference between men who improve and men who merely wish to improve is often nothing more than this. The former are specific, the latter are vague. Apply what I call the specificity test. Any weakness statement that cannot immediately be converted into a specific scenario is too vague to be useful. I lack discipline fails the test. I failed to rise at my intended hour 3 mornings out of 5 passes it. The first invites endless rumination. The second invites direct action. Document your weaknesses in this format. In situation X, I respond with Y, which produces result Z. For example, when criticized publicly, I become defensive and counterattack, which escalates conflict and damages relationships. This precision reveals both the pattern and its consequences. Now you have something to work with. Notice also the physical signature of each weakness. Every emotional failure manifests in the body. When you feel the weakness arising, note, where does tension appear? What is your breathing pattern? What posture do you adopt? These physical markers become early warning systems. The tightness in your chest, the shallow breathing, the clenched jaw, these arrive before the behavioral failure. Learn to read them. Not all weaknesses require equal attention. Some occur frequently, but cause little damage. Others occur rarely, but produce catastrophe when they do. Create a simple matrix. Rate each weakness by frequency and by severity. Attack the high-frequency, high-severity weaknesses first. This is strategic use of limited resources. For the next fortnight, carry a small notebook. Whenever you catch yourself in weakness, flinching from difficulty, speaking when silence would serve better, remaining silent when speech is required, record the specific incident immediately. Situation. Response. Consequence. Do not judge, explain, or contextualize. Merely record. After 14 days, review the entries. Patterns will emerge that generalized self-reflection has concealed for years. The primary error is making this exercise theoretical rather than observational. Do not sit and think about your weaknesses. Observe yourself in action over time. Memory is corrupted by self-protection. It will edit what you wish not to see. Only contemporaneous recording captures the truth. You now possess, or soon shall possess, a concrete, specific, prioritized inventory of your weaknesses. Not vague feelings of inadequacy, but actionable intelligence. You can answer precisely, what specific weakness shall I address first, and in what specific situations does it manifest? The map is drawn. The weaknesses are cataloged with precision. But upon what principles shall strength be built? We must now move from diagnosis to architecture, from knowing what is weak to understanding what strength truly is. Must learn to command within you operate 2 distinct capacities that must learn to work in concert. There is the experiencing mind that feels, and there is the observing mind that watches. Most men are imprisoned entirely within the first, unable to access the second. They are their emotions. When fear arises, they become fearful. When anger arises, they become angry. They cannot separate themselves from what they feel. The strong mind is different. It is not the mind without fear. Such a thing does not exist outside of pathology. It is the mind that can feel fear fully, whilst simultaneously watching itself feel fear from a position of calm assessment. This dual consciousness is the master key to emotional sovereignty. I discovered this during the Great War in the trenches. I had volunteered for service at the front, partly from duty, partly from the restless need for action that has characterized my life. Under shell fire, fear was present, vividly, physically present. My heart raced, my muscles tensed, every instinct screamed for flight, yet simultaneously another part of my mind observed, there is fear. Note the rapid heartbeat, the urge to run, the tightness in the chest. This observer was calm even as the experiencer was terrified. The observer could direct action whilst the experiencer merely suffered. I came to rely upon this observer. I cultivated it deliberately. It has served me in every crisis since. You must understand, you are not your emotion. You are the awareness in which emotions appear. This distinction sounds philosophical, but its effects are ruthlessly practical. The man who believes I am afraid is helpless. He has identified himself with the fear. The man who notices fear is present has established himself as something larger than the fear. He can act despite it. Here is a technique that seems simple but produces profound effect. When emotion arises, name it aloud. Not I am angry, but anger is present. Not I am anxious, but anxiety has arrived. This subtle linguistic shift breaks the identification between you and the feeling. You become the one who notices rather than the one who is consumed. Think of your mind as a battlefield and your observing consciousness as a general on a hilltop overlooking it. Down below, chaos reigns, emotions clashing, thoughts warring, impulses surging. But the general sees the chaos without being in the chaos. From this vantage, he can make decisions that the soldier in the melee cannot make. The catastrophic error is using the observer to suppress the experiencer. This creates internal warfare and eventual collapse. The observer's role is to witness, not to eliminate. Feel the fear fully, but feel it as the observer watches. Both capacities must be developed to their maximum. Suppressing feeling entirely, and you lose access to vital information. Allow feeling to rule, and you become a ship without rudder. Each morning, sit quietly for 5 minutes and observe your own mind. Do not attempt to control thoughts or feelings. Simply watch them arise and pass. There is a thought about today's obligations. There is a feeling of mild anxiety. There is a memory from yesterday. You are training the observer, strengthening its presence. The reader now possesses the foundational capacity for all emotional mastery. You can feel fear and act anyway. You can feel anger and respond strategically rather than reflexively. This is not mere concept. It is developing skill. But the observer needs something to serve. Action without purpose degrades into mere busyness. What provides the why that sustains effort when difficulty mounts? We must address the essential question of transcendent purpose. The purpose that makes you unstoppable. No man sustains difficult effort for his own sake alone. I have observed this truth across battlefields and parliaments, in victory and defeat. Self-interest is too weak a fuel for the journey we describe. The fire burns hot initially, but gutters and dies when the way grows hard. You must find, or create, a purpose larger than your own comfort, your own success, even your own survival. This transcendent purpose becomes the answer to every "why should I continue" that difficulty poses. Without it, you will eventually quit. With it, you become very nearly unstoppable. Consider 2 men I observed during the darkest days of 1940, when France was falling and invasion seemed certain. Both held positions of authority. Both faced identical pressures. One sought primarily to preserve his position and reputation. The other had connected his efforts to the survival of Western civilization itself. The first made increasingly poor decisions as pressure mounted, decisions designed to protect himself rather than achieve victory. He trimmed, he hedged, he calculated personal risk. The second man improved under pressure. His decisions grew clearer, his resolve stronger. His purpose dwarfed his personal concerns. Same circumstances, different purposes. Radically different performances. The soldier fights bravely when he fights for something beyond himself. His comrades, his country, his honor. The moment he fights only for his own survival, cowardice becomes rational. Why risk death for mere continued existence? But when the cause transcends the self, courage becomes the only sensible response. The sacrifice becomes meaningful rather than absurd. Ask yourself, for what would I sacrifice my tranquility? Your answer reveals your actual purpose. Most men discover their purposes are too small. Career advancement collapses under pressure. Financial security provides no strength when security itself is threatened. Personal happiness is too vague to demand sacrifice. You need something that makes your struggles meaningful, something that transforms difficulty from obstacle into contribution. Think in concentric circles. The immediate purpose, today's task. The proximate purpose, this month's goal. The ultimate purpose, what your life serves. All three must align. The soldier cleans his rifle. Immediate, to survive tomorrow's battle. Proximate, to protect his nation. Ultimate. If any circle is missing, motivation fragments. Without ultimate purpose, even the soldier begins to wonder why he bothers with the rifle. Here is a practical application. Identify one task you have been avoiding because it is difficult and uncomfortable. Before attempting it, spend 5 minutes writing the answer to these questions. What larger purpose does completing this task serve? Whom besides myself does it benefit? What vision of the future does it advance? Then undertake the task whilst holding this purpose in mind. Notice the difference in your capacity to persist. The error of abstraction haunts many earnest men. Purposes too lofty to connect to daily action produce no power. Serving humanity means nothing unless it connects to specific actions taken this week. Conversely, purely practical purposes divorced from larger meaning eventually exhaust themselves. You need both, the transcendent meaning and the concrete application. You now possess, or have begun seeking, a purpose sufficient to sustain difficult effort. You understand why previous attempts at self-improvement may have failed, not from lack of technique, but from lack of adequate reason. But purpose provides only the why. The question of how remains. Specifically, how does one begin acting strongly when one does not yet feel strong? We must now examine the counterintuitive relationship between action and confidence. Why you must act before you feel ready. The great lie that keeps men weak is this: first I must feel confident, then I can act confidently. It sounds reasonable. It feels true. And it is precisely backwards. Confidence does not precede confident action. It is produced by it. The body leads, the mind follows. Every significant capability you lack is being protected by your insistence on feeling ready before beginning. I tell you plainly, you will never feel ready. Begin anyway. I recall the experience of delivering my first major speech in the House of Commons. I had prepared for weeks. I had memorized my arguments, rehearsed my phrases, anticipated objections. Yet standing to speak, I felt entirely unequal to the task. My stomach churned. My hands trembled. My mind went blank in the moments before rising. Every feeling counseled retreat. You are not ready. Wait, prepare more. Find a better moment. I ignored these counselors and rose anyway. The first sentences were difficult, words forced through a reluctant throat. But by the third paragraph, something shifted. The act of speaking summoned forth capacity that mere preparation could never have produced. The feeling of confidence arrived, but it arrived through action, not before it. Had I waited until I felt ready, I would be waiting still. This principle applies universally. Treat feelings of unreadiness as information about what you fear, not as guidance about what you should do. When you feel unready, you have identified something worth beginning. The very presence of that discomfort marks the threshold you must cross. Large actions feel impossible. Small actions feel merely difficult. Begin, therefore, with the smallest possible action toward your goal. Motion generates motion. The man who merely opens the book he has been avoiding will often find himself reading. The man who merely puts on his shoes will often find himself walking. The man who waits until he feels like beginning may wait forever. After taking difficult action, observe what happens to your feelings. Document this pattern repeatedly until your deep mind accepts its truth, the feeling you lacked before action appears during or after action. Courage arrives in the doing, not in the waiting. When you cannot summon courage, create conditions that make cowardice impossible. Announce your intention publicly. Commit resources that cannot be recovered. Burn the boats, as the old commanders did upon landing on hostile shores. When retreat becomes more painful than advance, you will advance. The error here is confusing action first with recklessness. I do not counsel thoughtless plunging. Think, plan, prepare, then act despite residual uncertainty. The uncertainty will not resolve through further thinking. It resolves through action and adjustment. Additionally, beware of using "I'll start small" as permission to stay small. Small beginnings are tactics, not destinations. They are the first step across the threshold, not a permanent residence in the doorway. You now possess a principle that changes everything. You need never again wait for confidence that action itself produces. This insight breaks the paralysis that has imprisoned countless capable men. You hold the key to beginning anything. The understanding that beginning is how one becomes capable of having begun. The foundations are now laid. Dual consciousness, transcendent purpose, action-generated confidence. But how do these principles translate into daily practice? We must descend from philosophy to methodology, to the specific disciplines that forge the fortress we have designed. The morning battle that determines everything. The war for mental sovereignty is won or lost before breakfast. What you do in the first hour after waking, before the world makes its demands, before circumstances dictate your responses, establishes the pattern for everything that follows. The man who conquers his morning conquers his day. The man who surrenders his morning has already lost. I developed my own protocol over decades of public life, through years of crisis and calm alike. The essential elements are these. Rise immediately. When the hour of waking arrives, rise without negotiation or deliberation. No debate with yourself, no 5 more minutes, no checking the time to calculate how much longer you might sleep. The mind that debates with itself about rising has already surrendered authority. The first negotiation of the day is the pattern for all negotiations that follow. Win it. Apply physical shock, cold water on the face, vigorous movement, any stimulus that jolts the body into alertness. The mind follows the body. This we have established. Wake the body forcefully, and the mind awakens with it. The warm, gradual emergence that feels pleasant is precisely what weakens you. Feed your mind before others consume it. Before you read the correspondence that demands response, before you consume the news that disturbs equilibrium, before you attend to the requests of others, feed your mind what you have chosen. Read something that strengthens. I spent mornings with Gibbon, with Macaulay, with the great historians whose perspective elevated my own. This is not luxury, it is necessity. The mind that begins the day receiving demands will spend the day responding to them. Write your intention. Not merely think it, write it. What do you intend to accomplish today? Written intention is a contract with yourself. Thought intention is merely wishful thinking, easily forgotten, easily excused. The physical act of writing commits you in ways that mental resolution cannot. Identify the essential task. What is the one thing that, if accomplished, would make this day successful regardless of what else occurs or fails to occur? Do this task first, before lesser demands consume your energy. The urgent will clamor for attention, the important waits quietly. You must choose the important before the urgent drowns it. Tomorrow morning implement this sequence. Rise at the determined hour without negotiation. Apply cold water. Read for 15 minutes something strengthening. Write the single most important task. Begin that task immediately. Observe the difference in your day's trajectory. The error of exception haunts men who understand these principles but fail to embody them. Just this once, I'll sleep in. But there is no just this once. Each exception is a precedent. Each surrender makes the next surrender easier. The pattern you establish through repetition is the pattern you possess. Repetition without exception is how character is forged. You now possess a concrete protocol for the most important hour of the day. Each morning becomes an opportunity for victory. A daily declaration that you, not your impulses, govern your existence. But what of the chaos that follows the morning? How does one maintain sovereignty amidst the provocations and unexpected difficulties of daily life? We must address the mastery of attention. The art of directing your own mind. The mind that cannot direct its own attention is at the mercy of circumstances. Every distraction that succeeds, every provocation that captures your focus, every worry that commandeers your thoughts represents a loss of sovereignty. Attention is the fundamental resource upon which all other capacities depend. Master it or be mastered by whatever happens to be loudest. During the war, I developed techniques for maintaining focus whilst writing amidst chaos. The room might contain advisors awaiting decisions, telephones demanding answers, maps revealing crises. Yet for the period of writing, these did not exist for me. I had trained myself to withdraw attention from all but the page before me. This capacity was not natural. It was forged through years of deliberate practice. You must understand that attention is trainable, a muscle that strengthens with use and atrophies with neglect. Most men never exercise it deliberately. They allow attention to wander wherever stimulation beckons, then wonder why they accomplish so little of what they intend. Begin with a single-point focus exercise. Choose an object, a candle flame, a mark on the wall, your own breath. Hold your attention upon it without wavering. Begin with 2 minutes. Work toward 20. The mind will rebel. It will generate urgent thoughts, sudden itches, compelling reasons to stop. Each time you notice attention has wandered and return it to the chosen object, you strengthen the governing faculty. The returning is the exercise. For one day, catalog every time your attention is captured against your will. The sounds that interrupt, the worries that intrude, the memories that arise unbidden, the conversations of others that pull your focus. Simply note each instance. This cataloging creates awareness, and awareness enables resistance. You cannot fight an enemy you do not see. Think of attention as a budget. You possess limited attentional resources each day. Each worry withdraws from the account. Each distraction spends what cannot be recovered. Each unnecessary engagement depletes what might have been invested wisely. Begin treating attention as the precious finite resource it actually is. When attention wanders, as it inevitably will, do not become frustrated. Frustration is itself a distraction. Simply note wandered and return. The practice is the returning, not the unbroken focus. No one maintains perfect concentration. The strong-minded simply return more quickly and more consistently. Establish a daily period, minimum 20 minutes, ideally extending to an hour, of uninterrupted single-focus work. During this period, no correspondence, no conversation, no attention to anything but the chosen task. Treat this period as sacred, as non-negotiable as any appointment with any person. The error of judgment is becoming frustrated with a wandering mind and declaring oneself incapable. The wandering is expected. The returning is the training. Build capacity gradually, as you would build any physical strength. You now possess both understanding and method for developing concentrated attention. You can direct your mind where you choose and withdraw it from where it does not belong. This capacity transforms the effectiveness of everything you do. But attention can be directed. What happens when external circumstances assault it? When criticism arrives, when failure occurs, when fear strikes, we must construct our defenses in advance. Building your mind's defenses in advance. The time to decide how you will respond to provocation is not when you are provoked. The time to design your procedure for receiving criticism is not when criticism arrives. The time to establish your recovery protocol for failure is not when failure occurs. Mental ramparts must be constructed before the siege, in conditions of calm and practiced until automatic. I learned this preparing for parliamentary combat. I knew that opponents would attempt to provoke me into rage or reduce me to stammering defense. Before entering the chamber on contentious days, I would rehearse mentally. When attacked, I will listen completely, respond calmly, and find the element of truth even in unfair criticism. This was not natural temperament. It was designed response. And on numerous occasions, this prepared response preserved my effectiveness, when instinct would have produced disaster. You must build protocols for the attacks you will certainly face. The criticism protocol. When criticism arrives, first listen completely without interrupting. Then thank the critic. Yes, thank them, regardless of their tone. Next, identify any genuine truth in the criticism. There usually is some. Acknowledge that truth openly. Discard the remainder without resentment. Finally, proceed unchanged in purpose. Practice this sequence until it becomes automatic. The fear procedure. When fear arises, name it immediately. Fear is present. Locate it physically. There is tightness in my chest. Ask the observer question, what is fear telling me? Ask the action question, what is the wisest response here? Then take that response regardless of feeling. Fear may remain. You act anyway. The failure recovery process. When failure occurs, acknowledge it fully and immediately. No excuses. Extract the lesson whilst memory is fresh. What specifically caused this failure? What warning signs did I ignore? Design the adjustment. What will I do differently? Implement that adjustment immediately. Then release the failure. It has been converted to education and need not be carried further. Select the form of attack you most frequently encounter. Write out your response protocol in explicit steps. Then visualize 3 scenarios where this attack arrives and mentally rehearse your protocol. The mental rehearsal builds pathways that enable execution when circumstances prevent deliberation. Soldiers drill not because the drill is combat, but because the drill prepares the body to act when the mind is overwhelmed. The error of rigidity must be avoided. Protocols are guides, not scripts. Real situations will vary. Your response must adapt whilst maintaining the protocol's purpose. But having a protocol, having thought through your response in advance, means you are not improvising under fire. You are executing with adjustment rather than inventing whilst panicked. You now possess prepared responses to the most common assaults on mental sovereignty. You no longer need to improvise under pressure. This preparation transforms your relationship with difficulty. It becomes expected, managed, survivable. Individual disciplines are established. morning protocol, attention mastery, prepared responses. But how do these work together in the complex flow of actual life? We must address integration, the coordination of separate capacities into unified operation. Reading situations like a general reads battlefields. Every situation you enter contains information that most men miss. They see only the surface, what is said, what is obvious, what presents itself for notice. The strong-minded learn to read circumstances as a general reads terrain, identifying advantages, anticipating obstacles, perceiving where danger and opportunity reside before either announces itself. I recall my first cabinet meeting after assuming the premiership in May 1940. The room contained men who had opposed my elevation, men uncertain of my capacities, men calculating whether to support or undermine. To act effectively, I needed to read each position accurately, not what was said, but what was revealed in silences, in glances, in the positioning of chairs, and the tension of shoulders. Acting on accurate reading enabled effective leadership. Acting on wishful perception would have produced disaster. Most information a situation will yield is available in the first 30 seconds, if you are paying attention. Enter slowly. Observe deliberately. Speak only after assessment. The man who bursts in talking has surrendered his opportunity to see. Upon entering any significant situation, ask yourself 3 questions. First, what do people here want? Not what they say they want, what they actually want. Second, what do they fear? Fear drives more behavior than desire, though it hides more carefully. Third, what are they not saying? The omissions often reveal more than the statements. These 3 questions, honestly answered, expose more than hours of explicit discussion. Bodies reveal what words conceal. Notice who sits forward and who sits back, who meets eyes and who avoids them, where tension is visible and where ease resides. What is the energy of the room? Heavy or light, tense or relaxed? The man who spoke confidently but sat rigidly and avoided your gaze has told you something his words denied. Everyone in every situation advances interests, whether consciously or not. Map these interests, even roughly, and behavior becomes predictable. Actions that seem puzzling become clear when you identify the interest they serve. Why did he oppose a measure he previously supported? Find the interest that shifted, and you find your answer. At your next significant meeting, practice deliberate reading. Arrive early and position yourself where you can observe. As others enter, form initial impressions. After the event, write your observations and check them against subsequent information. This practice develops pattern recognition that eventually becomes automatic. The error of projection threatens all assessment. We see what we expect or fear rather than what is present. Challenge your readings, especially those that conveniently confirm existing beliefs. If your reading suggests everyone agrees with you, look again. If your reading suggests everyone opposes you, look again. Accuracy requires suspicion of convenient conclusions. You now perceive situations with a trained eye. You see what others miss, the unstated interests, the concealed fears, the opportunities invisible to less observant minds. This enhanced perception improves every decision, every interaction, every negotiation. Situations can be read, but they must also be navigated. Decisions must be made, often quickly, often with incomplete information. We must address the art of decisive action. The art of decision, when certainty is impossible. Decisive men are not those who possess certainty. Such certainty rarely exists outside of mathematics and the grave. The decisive are those who have freed themselves from 3 paralyzing illusions: that perfect information is available if only they search longer, that risk-free options exist if only they think harder, and that waiting will produce the clarity it almost never provides. During the war, I faced a decision that haunts strategists still: whether to divert resources to a secondary front that promised opportunity but risked disaster. The intelligence was contradictory. The advisors were divided. The outcome was genuinely uncertain. Yet a decision had to be made. Delay was itself a choice, and delay had consequences. I gathered available information. I identified the range of reasonable options. I selected based on strategic purpose rather than the fantasy of guaranteed success. I committed fully. And, this is crucial, I prepared to adapt based on results. The decision proved correct, but my process would have been identical had it proved mistaken. Good process does not guarantee good outcomes. It merely makes them more likely. Ask yourself, would more information actually change my decision? Often, additional data would merely confirm what you already know or generate new uncertainties to replace the old. When more information would not alter your choice, you have sufficient information. Proceed. Most decisions are more reversible than they appear. The fear of commitment typically exceeds its actual danger. Ask, if this proves wrong, what are my options for adjustment? Usually, options exist. The irreversible decision is rare. The paralysis that treats every decision as irreversible is common. Here is the protocol I recommend. Make the decision, then pursue it as if certain, whilst remaining genuinely open to evidence that requires adjustment. This is not contradiction. This is mature operation under uncertainty. The pilot commits fully to the landing approach whilst remaining prepared to abort if conditions demand. Commitment and adaptability are not opposites. They are partners. Allocate specific time for deliberation, proportional to the decision's significance. When time expires, decide. This prevents the common trap of indefinite analysis, which masquerades as thoroughness whilst actually serving cowardice. The man who says, "I need more time to think," often means, "I fear the responsibility of choosing." Identify a decision you have been postponing. Allocate 30 minutes, no more, to systematic analysis. List options. Assess each against your priorities. Identify risks and mitigations. At 30 minutes, decide. Then act immediately. Notice, the sky does not fall. Adjustment remains possible. The paralysis of indecision was worse than any likely outcome. The error of confusing deliberation with wisdom afflicts many earnest men. Extended analysis can be avoidance disguised as thoughtfulness. Equally, do not confuse decisiveness with stubbornness. The decisive man acts on his decision, but adjusts based on evidence. The stubborn man persists regardless of evidence. These are opposites. You now approach decision without the paralysis that has afflicted you. You understand that waiting for certainty is waiting forever, that decision is skill rather than trait, and that committed action under uncertainty is not recklessness but maturity. Decisions produce results, and results are not always victory. What happens when things go wrong? We must address the essential skill of recovery, how to rise faster than you fall. The strong-minded are not those who never fall. Everyone falls. They are those who rise faster. The interval between failure and recovery, between falling and rising, is where the difference between strong and weak becomes visible. This interval can be trained. It can be shortened. It can be reduced to almost nothing. The Gallipoli disaster was the greatest failure of my early career. It drove me from office and nearly ended my public life. Men who had praised me now avoided my company. The comfortable path was withdrawal, self-protection, the permanent marking of myself as a man who had failed greatly. I chose differently. I treated the catastrophe as education. What specifically had gone wrong? What decisions had been mine, and what had been others? What would I do differently with the knowledge I now possessed? I did not deny the failure. Denial prevents learning. I extracted its lessons with surgical precision. Within 2 years, I was back in government. Within decades, I was leading the nation through its greatest trial. The failure that might have destroyed me became part of the foundation that enabled later success. When failure occurs, acknowledge it fully and immediately. Not circumstances were difficult. Not others share the blame. Simply, I failed. This acknowledgement is not self-punishment. It is the prerequisite for analysis. What you do not admit, you cannot examine. What you cannot examine, you cannot improve. Within 48 hours of failure, whilst memory remains fresh, write the answers to these questions. What specifically caused this failure? What warning signs did I ignore? What was within my control that I handled poorly? What will I do differently when similar circumstances arise? This converts failure to education. The tuition has been paid. Extract the value. Failure generates emotion, disappointment, anger, shame. Do not suppress these feelings. Set aside a defined period, 1 hour, 1 evening, to feel them fully. Rage if you must. Grieve what was lost. Then close that period and return to action. Emotion given its due does not linger. Emotion suppressed poisons continuously, leaking into every subsequent effort. The longer you wait to return to action after failure, the harder returning becomes. Fear accumulates. Doubt solidifies. The skilled practitioner returns quickly, not because feelings have fully resolved, but because action itself resolves them. The horse that throws you must be remounted immediately, not after lengthy contemplation of the fall. In your ongoing self-narrative, integrate failures as chapters, not conclusions. I failed at this, learned that, and later succeeded at the other. This frame prevents failure from becoming identity. You are not your failures. You are the one who learns from failures and continues. You now possess methodology for rapid recovery. The interval between falling and rising, that is the measure of mental strength. You have techniques for minimizing that interval. Failure has been transformed from catastrophe to process. The skills are integrated. The capacity for navigation is developed, but what is the purpose of this sovereignty? What becomes possible when the fortress is truly built? We must address the ultimate questions. The freedom only the strong can know. Political freedom is a shadow without psychological freedom. I have seen men living in nations of perfect liberty who remained enslaved within their own skulls, prisoners of their fears, their resentments, their unexamined appetites, their desperate need for the approval of others. External chains had been struck off. Internal chains remained firmly fastened. During the war, I visited a prisoner, a man of remarkable spirit, confined in circumstances that should have broken him. The cell was small. The conditions were harsh. Every external freedom had been removed. Yet speaking with him, I encountered someone freer than most men walking unconfined through London streets. He had achieved what circumstances could not touch, sovereignty over his own mind. The bars constrained his body. Nothing constrained his thought, his choice of response, his inner life. I left that cell having received more than I gave. What controls you? Identify it honestly. What can another person do or say that reliably produces a particular response in you that pulls your strings as a puppeteer pulls a marionette? Each such control is a chain. Each chain is a loss of freedom. The work of liberation is the breaking of these chains, one by one. Between any stimulus and your response lies a space. In that space lives your freedom. The practices we have developed, dual consciousness, prepared protocols, attention mastery, these enlarge that space. Where previously stimulus triggered automatic response, now stimulus enters a field of choice. This is what freedom means in practical terms. List your fears, then ask of each, what would become possible if this fear no longer controlled me? The sum of these answers reveals what your fears are costing you. The cost typically exceeds whatever protection the fears provide. Fear claims to serve you. Usually it merely imprisons you. Identify whose approval you require to feel adequate. Write the names. Each name is a master you have accepted. Each is a dependency that compromises your sovereignty. True freedom means that approval is pleasant when it arrives, but not required for function. You act from purpose, not from the need to be thought well of. The error of confusing freedom with isolation must be avoided. The strong are not those who need nothing from others. That is not strength, but fear disguised as self-sufficiency. The strong are those who can need without being controlled by need. They can love without clutching. They can want without demanding. They can lose without being destroyed. Identify one behavior you engage in primarily to gain approval or avoid disapproval. This week, deliberately omit that behavior once. Observe what happens, both externally and internally. The external consequences are usually far less than feared. The internal consequences are liberation. You now perceive freedom in its true form, not merely absence of external constraint, but presence of internal sovereignty. All our work has served this liberation. You taste now the quality of life that genuine freedom makes possible. Freedom enables choice. But choice of what? What becomes possible when mental sovereignty is achieved? We must explore the rippling consequences of strength. What the fortified mind makes possible mental sovereignty is not a retreat from life, but a foundation for fuller engagement with it. The strong-minded are capable of deeper love, more genuine contribution, greater risk-taking, and truer relationship than the weak. They can extend themselves into the world without being destroyed by that extension. The fortress is not for hiding within, it is for operating from. My marriage to Clementine sustained me through every crisis, every defeat, every triumph. But this was not a relationship of weakness clutching at weakness, two drowning people dragging each other under. It was a meeting of two people capable of standing alone who chose to stand together. I could offer her genuine partnership because I was not desperately extracting reassurance. She could offer me honest counsel because she was not afraid of my reaction. Mental strength enabled rather than prevented the vulnerability that true intimacy requires. The man who cannot stand alone cannot truly stand with another. He can only lean. And leaning eventually exhausts both parties. Examine your relationships through this lens. Am I connecting from strength or from need? Am I offering or demanding? Relationships formed from need become prisons. Both parties feel trapped, one by the neediness, the other by the burden of filling an unfillable void. Relationships formed from abundance become gardens. Both parties flourish because neither is draining the other. The strong can risk because they can afford to lose. The weak cling to security because loss would expose the emptiness within. Mental sovereignty enables ventures the fearful cannot undertake. The entrepreneur who fears failure will make timid decisions. The lover who fears rejection will never truly declare himself. The leader who fears unpopularity will never lead. Those not consumed by self-protection have resources for genuine contribution. The weak spend their energy defending a fragile perimeter. The strong can invest their energy in building something that outlasts them. What would you contribute if you had no fear of failure or rejection? That contribution awaits the arrival of your strength. True tenderness, real gentleness with others, requires strength. The weak cannot afford gentleness. Any perceived threat must be met with defensive force. The strong can be gentle precisely because they are not endangered by the weakness or aggression of others. The strongest men I have known have also been the most capable of kindness. Mental sovereignty enables patient action toward distant goals. The desperate need immediate results. The secure can invest in outcomes they may not live to see. What would you build if you could wait decades for fruition? That building awaits your sovereignty. You now perceive what mental strength makes possible. Not isolation, but connection. Not protection, but contribution. Not rigidity, but the flexibility only the secure can afford. One question remains, the question that underlies all others. What of death? How does the sovereign mind face the certainty of ending? We must address the ultimate test. The final fear and the final freedom. No consideration of mental strength is complete without confronting death. It is the final fear that shadows all other fears. Every anxiety, traced to its root, arrives eventually at mortality. The fear of failure is fear of wasted time, and time is limited by death. The fear of rejection is fear of being alone, and death is the ultimate aloneness. Master this final fear, and all lesser fears diminish. I have faced death repeatedly. As a young officer charging dervishes with sword drawn at Omdurman, I did not know whether I would survive the next minute. In the trenches of the Great War, shells exploded close enough to shower me with debris. In illness, I have felt the body's systems falter. In advancing years, I have watched the horizon draw nearer with each passing season. Each confrontation clarified what mattered. Each acceptance liberated energy previously consumed by denial. The weak man lives in terror of death or in denial of it. Both responses distort his entire existence. Terror produces desperate clinging to safety, to approval, to the preservation of what cannot be preserved. Denial produces the illusion of unlimited time, which generates the postponement of everything important. Neither response permits genuine living. The strong man has contemplated death fully, accepted its certainty, and thereby freed himself from its tyranny. He can take risks the fearful cannot take. He can prioritize correctly, knowing time is finite. He can face each day without the frantic desperation that poisons lesser lives. Ancient wisdom recommends regular contemplation of mortality, not morbid wallowing, but clear-eyed recognition, I will die. This day could be the last. This action could be final. Such contemplation clarifies priorities instantly. The petty grievances dissolve. The urgent but trivial matters recede. What remains is what actually matters. When facing any significant decision, ask, from my deathbed, looking back, What would I wish I had done? This question penetrates the fog of immediate concerns and reveals what you will actually regret leaving undone. Act on that knowledge whilst action remains possible. You possess less time than you think. This is not pessimism, but mathematics. Acting from awareness of limited time produces entirely different decisions than acting from the assumption of unlimited future. The man who knows his hours are numbered, as all men's hours are numbered, does not waste them on the inconsequential. What will survive your ending? Not fame. That is vanity. Contribution. What will you have added to the world that persists when you do not understand? This question should guide the investment of your remaining time, however much or little that proves to be. Set aside 1 hour in solitude. Contemplate directly. I will die. This life will end. Notice what arises, fear perhaps, or sadness, or unexpected peace. Then ask, given that this is true, what changes? What have I been avoiding? What have I been pursuing that I would abandon? What would I do today if I believed this day might be my last? Write your answers. Then act on one of them this week. You have now confronted the ultimate fear and discovered it is not the monster your avoidance suggested. You possess a relationship with mortality that clarifies rather than paralyzes, that liberates rather than imprisons. Closing invitation, we began with weakness acknowledged and end with death accepted. Between these poles stretches the path we have walked together. From the shattering of comfortable illusions, through the architecture of sovereignty, through the forging of practical capacity, through the integration of skills into life itself, to this final recognition that frees all others. The promise of this work was never happiness, that is, a byproduct. It was never success, that depends partly on fortune. The promise was sovereignty, unconditional command over your own mind and therefore over your own experience of existence. You now possess the knowledge. What remains is practice, the daily, unglamorous, essential practice that converts understanding into capacity. There shall be days when you fail to rise as you intend. Rise the next day. Notice and return. There shall be periods when progress seems invisible. Trust the process. The water appears unchanged until suddenly, without warning, it boils. The version of yourself that exists on the other side of this practice, the version that walks through circumstances that would destroy others, that offers strength instead of demanding support, that terrifies opposition without malice and inspires alliance without manipulation. That version is not fantasy. It is possibility. It awaits your arrival. You were not built for weakness. You were not constructed for capitulation. Within you lies the material for something formidable, waiting only to be shaped by the disciplines we have detailed into the fortress it was meant to become. Come then. The work begins now.